Carlos Ramirez was a hardworking mechanic who ran a small garage in a quiet neighborhood. Life wasn't easy for him. He worked long hours and struggled to make ends meet, but he always tried to do the right thing. To Carlos, fixing cars wasn't just about earning money. It was about helping people get back on the road and back to their lives. One cold evening, as Carlos was closing up his garage, he saw headlights coming toward him. A fancy car pulled into the driveway, sputtered, and then stopped completely. Out stepped a young woman wearing nice clothes. She looked nervous and out of place in the old, dusty garage. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice shaky. "My car broke down, and I don't know what to do." Carlos nodded and grabbed his tools. "Don't worry, let me check it out." He popped open the hood and quickly figured out the problem. A broken alternator. Fixing it would take time and the part wasn't cheap. But when Carlos glanced at the woman, he noticed how tired and stressed she looked. She didn't seem like someone used to being stuck in situations like this. "I'll fix it for you," Carlos said with a smile. The woman hesitated. "How much will it cost?" Carlos thought for a moment. He could charge her. She clearly had money, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she seemed embarrassed or lost. Or maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to need help. "No charge," he said finally. "It's on me." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure? I can pay, I want to." "It's fine," Carlos replied. "We all need help sometimes. Just glad I could lend a hand." For the next hour, Carlos worked under the dim light, fixing the alternator and making sure the car was running perfectly. When he finished, the woman, whose name he learned was Elena, was pacing nearby, clutching her phone tightly. "Thank you so much," Elena said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This means more to me than you know." "It's nothing," Carlos said, brushing off her thanks. "Just happy I could help." What neither of them realized was that this simple act of kindness would change both their lives in ways they never expected. As Carlos waved goodbye to Elena and watched her drive off into the night, he didn't think much of their encounter. To him, it was just another day of doing his job, helping someone in need without expecting anything in return. But for Elena, the experience lingered in her mind long after she left the garage. Elena Hart wasn't just any woman. She was the CEO of a global tech company, worth millions, though no one would have guessed it from her modest behavior that night. Traveling incognito to avoid attention, she had been on her way to a remote cabin to unwind when her car broke down. Stranded and frustrated, she hadn't expected to find kindness in such an unlikely place. A rundown garage in a quiet neighborhood. What struck Elena most wasn't just Carlos's skill in fixing her car, it was his generosity. He could have charged her for the repair. Instead, he chose to help her for free, despite clearly struggling himself. That kind of selflessness was rare in her world, where people often acted out of self-interest or greed. The next morning, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Carlos. She remembered how he worked tirelessly under poor lighting, using tools that looked worn and outdated. His garage was humble, almost falling apart, yet he still gave his best effort to help her. It made her reflect on her own life, how easy it was to take things for granted when you had everything at your fingertips. Determined to learn more about him, Elena decided to investigate quietly. Using her resources, she discovered that Carlos was a single father raising 2 young children while supporting his elderly mother. His garage barely stayed afloat, and he often skipped meals to ensure his family had enough. Despite these hardships, he was known in the community as a kind and honest man who never turned away anyone in need. Elena felt a deep sense of admiration and guilt. Here was a man giving freely despite having so little, while she lived in luxury and rarely thought twice about helping strangers. Inspired by his actions, she realized she wanted to do something meaningful, not just for Carlos, but for others like him. That evening, Elena sat in her office, staring at photos of Carlos's garage and notes about his life. An idea began forming in her mind. What if she used her wealth and influence not just to repay Carlos, but to create lasting change? "This is what leadership should be about," she murmured to herself. "Not just building businesses, but building communities." With renewed purpose, Elena drafted a plan. She wouldn't simply hand Carlos money. That felt impersonal and impractical. Instead, she would use her connections to improve his business, upgrade his equipment, and bring new opportunities to his neighborhood. And she'd do it all without revealing her involvement, at least not right away. Little did Carlos know, his simple act of kindness was about to transform not only his own life but also the lives of everyone around him. Over the next few weeks, strange things began happening around Carlos's garage. New customers started showing up, people driving expensive cars and wearing suits, the kind of clients who normally wouldn't visit a small, rundown shop like his. At first, Carlos was puzzled. How had they even found him? Then came the deliveries. One morning, a truck arrived carrying state-of-the-art tools and equipment. Items Carlos could never afford on his own. The delivery driver handed him a note that simply read, "Every mechanic deserves the best." There was no name, just those words typed neatly on plain paper. Carlos scratched his head, confused but grateful. "Must be some kind of mistake," he muttered to himself. Still, he couldn't deny how much easier the new tools made his work. Repairs that once took hours now went faster, and word spread quickly about the quality service at his garage. But it didn't stop there. A local bank representative showed up one afternoon, offering Carlos a low-interest loan to expand his business. When Carlos hesitated, unsure if he should accept, the representative assured him, "It's already been approved. Someone vouched for you." The changes kept coming. Neighbors noticed improvements in the area too. New streetlights were installed, potholes were fixed, and a nearby park received a fresh coat of paint and new playground equipment. Everyone whispered about the sudden upgrades, wondering who was behind them. For Carlos, the turning point came when a major car dealership reached out, asking if he'd be interested in becoming their official repair partner. The offer included training programs for his staff, marketing support, and access to discounted parts. It was an opportunity he couldn't pass up, but it also left him uneasy. Late one night, as Carlos sat alone in the garage reviewing invoices, he let out a heavy sigh. "Why is all this happening?" he wondered aloud. He wasn't used to receiving help without earning it. Was this some kind of charity? So why now? The next day, while working on a customer's car, Elena walked into the garage. This time, she wasn't stranded or stressed. She looked confident and composed, dressed in a tailored suit. Carlos froze, recognizing her immediately. "You?" he exclaimed, wiping grease from his hands. "What are you doing here?" Elena smiled warmly. "I came to see how you're doing, and to explain everything." She pulled up a chair and began telling him the truth. How she was the CEO of a tech company, how his kindness inspired her to take action, and how she'd secretly orchestrated the changes to improve his life and community. "I wanted to repay your generosity," Elena said sincerely. "Not with money directly, but by giving you the tools and opportunities to succeed. You reminded me what truly matters, helping others without expecting anything in return." Carlos listened in stunned silence, overwhelmed by her words. For years, he'd felt invisible, struggling to keep his head above water. Now, someone saw his efforts and believed in him enough to create real change. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But I didn't do anything special. Just helped someone in need." Elena shook her head firmly. "That's exactly why you're special, Carlos. Not everyone would have done the same." As they talked, Carlos realized something profound. Kindness wasn't just about fixing cars or solving problems. It was about creating ripples that touched lives far beyond what he could see. And now, thanks to Elena, those ripples were growing into waves. With Elena's support, Carlos's garage became more than just a repair shop. It became a hub for the entire community. The upgrades and partnerships she arranged didn't just benefit Carlos. They created opportunities for everyone around him. New job training programs were introduced at the garage, teaching local teens and unemployed adults valuable skills in mechanics and automotive repair. Many of these trainees went on to secure stable jobs, breaking the cycle of poverty that had gripped their families for generations. Elena didn't stop there. Inspired by Carlos's humility and dedication, she expanded her efforts to revitalize the neighborhood. Rundown buildings were renovated into affordable housing units, and a new community center opened its doors, offering free workshops, after-school programs, and health clinics. Local businesses received grants to expand their operations, creating even more jobs and boosting the area's economy. At first, some residents were skeptical. "Why is all this happening now?" one neighbor asked Carlos during a town meeting. "Is it too good to be true?" Carlos understood their doubts. He'd felt the same way when the changes began. But he reassured them, speaking from his heart. "Sometimes people step up to help when we least expect it. All we can do is accept it graciously and use it to make our lives better." His words resonated with the crowd, easing their fears. Slowly but surely, trust grew as the improvements proved lasting and impactful. One evening, Elena joined Carlos at the grand opening of the new community center. As they stood together watching children play basketball and families gather for dinner, Elena turned to him with a smile. "You've given so much to this community," she said softly. "Now it's your turn to let others give back to you." Carlos shook his head, still humbled by her generosity. "I didn't do anything special. You're the one making all this happen." "No," Elena replied firmly. "This isn't about me. It's about what you started. Your kindness reminded me of what really matters. Lifting each other up, no matter where we come from." The event drew media attention, shining a spotlight on the neighborhood's transformation. Reporters interviewed Carlos, calling him the mechanic who changed a community. Though uncomfortable with the praise, he used the platform to highlight the importance of helping others and giving back. As months passed, Carlos continued mentoring young mechanics and volunteering at the community center. He encouraged others to pay forward the kindness they'd received, creating a culture of generosity that spread throughout the area. Meanwhile, Elena publicly credited Carlos during a charity gala hosted by her company. Standing before a room full of executives and philanthropists, she shared his story, calling him a true hero and urging others to follow his example. "Kindness doesn't require wealth or power," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "It starts with simple actions, like fixing a stranger's car for free. That's how change begins." The audience erupted into applause, inspired by her message. For many, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that success isn't measured by profits alone but by the lives we touch along the way. Through it all, Carlos remained grounded, never forgetting where he came from. Every tool in his upgraded garage, every smile from a neighbor, and every child learning a new skill served as a testament to the ripple effect of his selflessness. Little did he know, his journey was far from over. The seeds of kindness he and Elena had planted were growing into something extraordinary, a movement that would inspire countless others to believe in the power of compassion. As the months turned into years, Carlos's life continued to transform in ways he never imagined. What started as a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a legacy of generosity that touched countless lives, including his own. Yet through it all, Carlos remained humble, always reminding himself that none of this would have been possible without the help of others. Elena stayed by his side, not just as a benefactor but as a friend. Their bond grew stronger with time, built on mutual respect and shared values. Together, they traveled to other communities, sharing their story and inspiring others to embrace kindness as a way of life. Carlos often spoke at schools, shelters, and conferences, urging people to look beyond their struggles and find ways to uplift those around them. "You don't need money or power to make a difference," he'd say, his voice steady and sincere. "All you need is a willingness to help, even if it's just one person." His words resonated deeply, especially with young people who saw him as proof that ordinary individuals could achieve extraordinary things. One teenager, Miguel, approached Carlos after a talk, tears streaming down his face. "I thought no one cared about kids like me," Miguel confessed. "But hearing your story makes me believe I can change my life too." Carlos placed a reassuring hand on Miguel's shoulder. "You absolutely can. Start small, help someone else even when it's hard. That's how we build better futures." Meanwhile, Elena launched a nationwide initiative called Ripple of Kindness, inspired by Carlos's journey. The program provided funding and resources to underserved communities, encouraging local leaders to create sustainable change. CEOs, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists joined the movement, pledging to use their influence for good. Through it all, Carlos never lost sight of his roots. He still worked long hours at the garage, mentoring trainees and ensuring every customer left satisfied. His children, now teenagers, grew up watching their father lead by example. They learned the value of hard work, humility, and giving back, lessons they carried into their own lives. One evening, as Carlos sat on the porch with Elena, reflecting on everything they'd accomplished, she turned to him with a smile. "You've changed so many lives, Carlos, including mine. You reminded me what true success looks like." Carlos chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should do, help someone in need." "That's exactly why you're special," Elena replied firmly. "Not everyone chooses kindness, especially when it's hard. But you did, and because of that, the world is a better place." Their friendship became a symbol of unity, a reminder that kindness transcended wealth, status, or background. People from all walks of life looked to them as examples of how collaboration and compassion could spark lasting change. As Carlos tucked his children into bed that night, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunities he'd been given but for the chance to pass them on to others. His journey had taught him an invaluable lesson, that kindness wasn't just an action. It was a cycle, creating ripples far beyond what anyone could predict. Little did he know, his story would continue to inspire generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of selflessness and gratitude. Years later, Carlos stood on a stage in front of thousands of people at the annual Ripple of Kindness Gala. The event celebrated the initiative's success, how it had transformed communities across the country and inspired similar movements worldwide. As he looked out at the cheering crowd, Carlos felt a deep sense of pride. What had started as a simple act of fixing a stranger's car had grown into something far greater than he ever imagined. Elena sat in the front row, smiling warmly as she watched him deliver his speech. "When I fixed that car years ago," Carlos began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I didn't think about changing my life or anyone else's. I just thought about doing the right thing. But what happened next taught me an important lesson. Kindness matters. Compassion matters. And no matter how small your actions may seem, they can spark a chain reaction of positive change." The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. For Carlos, this moment wasn't about recognition. It was about reminding everyone present that they, too, had the power to make a difference. After the ceremony, Elena approached him with a proud grin. "You've changed lives, Carlos," she said softly. "Not just yours, but countless others. This movement belongs to you as much as it does to me." Carlos shook his head, humbled. "No, Elena. None of this would have been possible without you. You saw value where others didn't, and you fought for it. Thank you." Their partnership had become more than gratitude. It was proof that even the most unlikely connections could transform lives, including their own. In the years that followed, Carlos continued advocating for underserved communities, traveling across the country to share his story and inspire change. He became a spokesperson for education access, job training, and community support, reminding audiences that courage isn't always loud or flashy. It's often quiet and selfless, like fixing a car for free. Elena remained by his side, using her influence to champion policies that uplifted overlooked groups. Together, they turned Ripple of Kindness into a nationwide initiative, ensuring that no one would ever feel invisible again. Through it all, Carlos never forgot the lesson he'd learned that fateful night. One act of kindness could spark a chain reaction of positive change. His simple decision to help someone in need had not only saved a life but also ignited a movement that touched thousands. One evening, as Carlos walked home under the same stars that had witnessed his struggles years ago, he reflected on how far he'd come. His journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had shaped him into the person he was today. And through it all, he'd learned one undeniable truth. Kindness always finds its way back to you. As he hugged his children goodbye before heading to another speaking engagement, Carlos realized something profound. His legacy wasn't just about what he'd done, it was about inspiring others to do the same. And so, the ripple of kindness continued, spreading outward and touching hearts across generations. One selfless act had sparked a legacy, one that would endure long after Carlos and Elena were gone. If this story inspired you, don't forget to share it with friends and family. Let us know in the comments. What's the kindest thing you've ever done or received? Your stories inspire us to keep creating tales that matter.